What is going on, guys? It's Buddy right here, back with another Ramble video. This time I'm talking about something a little different from the last one where I covered sailing. This time I'm gonna defend the view that everyone should hold in this game, namely the fact that we shouldn't have any increase in experience ever. So in 50 years, when your grandchildren are playing this game, they will be getting the same experience rates that you are getting now. This is the only reasonable and justified position that you can hold, and if you disagree with this, then you should definitely abandon your belief. I want to see if I can bring down the amount of time that I'm talking just a little bit, just because the last time I talked for 42 minutes, and that's a little bit excessive, even though I don't really particularly appeal to someone with the attention span of a 5-year-old. But I still think 42 minutes is a little bit excessive, just because of the fact that it's unedited. It's just one take, and it's kind of hard to digest that much when it's not edited. Like 10 minutes of edited is much different from 10 minutes of unedited footage. So let's see if I can speed run it a little bit. I probably won't be able to because I like talking, and just because these are very broad topics. But so I'll try and not unfold the entire argument, and rather just focus on the most important bits. So I want to defend this view that I just laid out, and firstly what I'm going to do is I'll try and distinguish RuneScape from other games. What I'm saying should be obvious, but you can tell when you listen to people speak about the game that they don't really have this so much in mind. So it is important and necessary to bring up. So first thing we see here is on the left hand side we have RuneScape, and on the right hand side we have a lot of different games grouped together. So you have on the right hand side you have games from a lot of different genres as well. You have some FPS games, you have MOBAs, you have battle royales, and on the left hand side we have RuneScape, which is just an MMORPG. So all these genres have a lot more in common than they do with RuneScape. They're very different. So the first thing that separates these two types of games is the fact that RuneScape is an infinite save dependent progression game, and these other games are finite non-saved independent progression games. So what exactly does this mean, and what are the implications of this? Well, first of all, when you play a game of any of those on the right hand side, you queue up and you play for 30-60 minutes, and that's pretty much about it. Then you can queue right into another game, of course. But these games, they all exist independent of each other. So if you have a lot of gold in one game, that doesn't necessarily translate to any gold in the following game. If you have a bad score in one game, that doesn't mean you will have a bad score in the next game. So all these games, they exist completely independent of one another. They have no bearing on the next game that you're playing, other than the things that you learn from playing a game, of course, that you hopefully can take into the next game. But the games are isolated. They don't have any bearing on subsequent games. And this is, of course, very different from what we know with old school RuneScape. So everything that you do today, will impact your gameplay tomorrow and the account that you post tomorrow. So very different games. And then another thing that separates these two games is RuneScape is generally the enjoyment that you extract from this game is usually deferred gratification, and on the right hand side, all these games is instant gratification. So you will immediately have a lot of fun, whereas that's not really the case with RuneScape. There are some exceptions to this, like staking would be an example of something that is instantly gratifying. Also, some types of PVM can be instantly gratifying if you get a very good drop very fast, for example. But for the most part, it is deferred gratification. And so if you don't like this aspect, if you don't like the fact that rewards are like delayed, then RuneScape is probably not the game for you. then you will probably find some of these other games more fun to play. And then the next point is about the implications of what it means that a game is finite and infinite. It's basically that all the games on the right hand side are insensitive to updates, and something like RuneScape is very sensitive to updates. If you make something OP in a game like CS:GO or League of Legends, then it doesn't really matter, because you can just change it again and the meta will be restored and you will be back to having a great game. So for example, if something like Aphelios is very imbalanced 2 patches ago, then it doesn't have any bearing on the following subsequent patches. The game is not currently suffering from the fact that Aphelios was once broken. So that's how these games are different. You can make very OP updates in all of these games on the right hand side, and you will be just fine because you can immediately fix them at a later point if you want. So temporary imbalances aren't bad, but that's very different from what the case is in RuneScape. If you have something imbalanced in the game, or you add a bad update, it will continue to poison the game. It will continue to have very terrible implications on the game. So, for example, we have many updates like that. Pretty much every update, I would say. But like something like Blowpipe continues to affect how this game is played. Like PVM wouldn't be in the state that it is in right now if it wasn't for the fact that we added Blowpipes that many years ago. So it continues to poison this game. And generally, we also don't make balancing changes like all these other games do. So, despite everyone knowing the fact that we have Forestry is a bad update, Wintertot is a bad update, Volcanic Mine is a bad update, we still have all these updates in the game. So, once something is added, it rarely gets taken away. And that's very different from how it is in other games. If something is bad, they will, at a later point, probably return to remove it from the game, or at least make balances. So the implications of this is, of course, that RuneScape is a very delicate game, and you have to be very, very careful when you make updates because of this fact. You don't have to be very careful in all these other games. They will be just fine even if you make something imbalanced, because you always get a second opportunity to rectify your mistake that you made initially. So it is very important that we are very careful with updates in RuneScape, and that's the last thing that we are, because right now we are having weekly updates, and according to me we should have probably updates every 3 months. Seems like a pretty good spot to go for, because I also think if you did it every 3 months, you would have much more hype surrounding updates than you have with just weekly updates. So, and the game is so delicate, RuneScape is such a delicate game that you can't have weekly updates without really affecting how the game is perceived and how the game will continue to exist in the future when you are weekly making changes to a game that is very sensitive to game updates. So this brings me right into the next point about a static meta versus a dynamic meta. In RuneScape we have a static meta, and it's not inherently bad or good, but it is necessary that we have a static meta. And in all these other games they have dynamic metas, of course, and it's also encouraged that they change the meta around, so it's just not the same. So it's not the same thing the entire time. But the reason why we need a static meta in our game is because if you make changes to something like Twisted Bow, say 1 week, it's a good weapon, and the next week it's a bad weapon, you obviously can't have that because of how it would affect the market. And so 1 week you would have Iron Man accounts going for Twisted Bow, for example, and the next week they would not want to go for Twisted Bow at all because it's a garbage item. And 1 week the Twisted Bow is 1 billion because it's insane, and the next week it's 100 million because it's not a very good item. So this is why that dynamic changes don't work in our game, and we shouldn't have dynamic changes as such. We should still have some PVM changes, just to offer some different challenges and to have some diversity in that regard. But a dynamics meta as such is not something that we can have or should have. So we should definitely just stick to a static meta like we have now, and that is especially true for something like skilling, which I'll return to shortly. And then the last thing is that RuneScape is of course a sandbox game, and all these other games have a clear objective. So that might be you have to plant a bomb, you have to kill all the enemies, or you have to kill the Nexus, so you have to kill the Ancient. Whereas in our game, sandbox game, you can choose to do whatever you want, and this doesn't mean that you should be able to customize how much XP you're getting and how fast you get items. Of course, that's not what is meant by sandbox games. It doesn't mean that you can customize it like that. It just means that you get to choose what you want to do in the game. So yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say on the topic of how RuneScape is different from other games, and it is pretty important to mention because a lot of people seem to be forgetting this when they're talking about the game. They seem to think that RuneScape is just like any other game. So chances are, if you don't like the fact that this game has deferred gratification, that is not instantly rewarding in the same way that all these other games are rewarding, then chances are that you should probably quit the game, in my opinion. The game is not going to be for you. It's a very unique game, and you either like it or you don't like it. So this is a game for everyone, and RuneScape shouldn't try to accommodate to other people. So like with RuneScape, you're supposed to be bored a lot of the time. A lot of the time you will be bored with what you're doing, but in some sense it's still enjoyable despite the fact that it's boring, because of the reward that you extract out of going through the boredom. So everyone playing this game, unless you're someone like Link's Titan who has like transgressed the boundaries of humanity, unless you're someone like him, then you probably will be pretty bored when you play this game sometimes, and it's just a condition that you have to accept. Otherwise, you can always turn to some of all these other games. So that's pretty much it for RuneScape versus other games. Then I want to say something about skilling versus PVM and how these things are different to one another. So with skilling, the reason why it's important, firstly let me explain why it's important to talk about this. So the reason it's important is because I am not inherently against PVM updates on a theoretical level, but I am against skilling updates if they make the game easier, if they make skilling faster. So this is why it's important to distinguish between the two different types of playing the game, because they are different. And so the first thing about skilling that's different from PVM is that skilling is intrinsic value, in my opinion, and PVM has instrumental value. So what it means is that skilling is valuable in and of itself. It is not valuable because of what it brings about, like the cases with PVM. And the clearest example we can see of this is the fact that skillers will spend a lot of money to get experience. When you go for tournament law, you will lose money, and you will need to make money to be able to skill. Whereas with PVM, you are profiting, and often you are PVMing with the intention of getting profit in mind, usually. And also, of course, you also have people going for pets, and you even have some people spending money to go for pets. But for the most part, we can distinguish these two from the fact that the former skilling is intrinsic value and the second is instrumental value. And then we can talk about representational value and functional value. Both skilling and PVM have functional value and representational value, It's just that skilling has mostly a representational value and PVM has mostly functional value. So what does this mean? So if you have something like 96 fishing, you can catch more fish than you could if you had 81 fishing, right? If you had 96 strength, you could deal more damage than if you only had 81 strength. So this is the functional aspect. And then the representational aspect would be the fact that having 96 fishing represents the fact that you have spent maybe 100 to 150 hours of fishing in the game. That's the representational value of that, you can say. And skilling post max is almost exclusively representational value. It is exclusively representational value. So the reason why having 150 mil fishing is more valuable than 100 mil fishing is not because of the fact that 150 mil fishing brings about more fish or gives you an advantage or any function in any respect. It is simply the fact that it represents the fact that you have fished for more hours, or you played more efficiently maybe, or you have put more hours into the game, more hours into fishing, that is. So that is the representational value, the intrinsic value of skilling, and that is exactly why we can't have increases in experience, because if we have that, you are diminishing the value of having that 150 million fishing experience versus the 100 mil fishing experience, for example. You are diminishing the gap between the two, and the value that it represents is now in both cases less than it otherwise would have been. So and for PVM, it is mostly functional value, but also to some degree it's representational value. So and we understand this intuitively as well. So when you see someone with infernal cape or fighter torso or defender, this all represents the fact that they did sock, they did some barbarian assault, they did cyclopses, and we know when we see these items in the game, we know that they represent something. Even if it's not something valuable, we know that they represent something, and we know that the max cape represents the fact that someone has gotten 99 in every skill, and we know roughly what that means. We know roughly how long that takes, etc. So all things have representational value, and for PVM, a lot of it is also about functional value. So if you take an infernal cape, it has the representational value of representing the fact that you have gone through SOC, which might have been very difficult and might have taken you many attempts and might have taken you 40-50 hours of practice and cost you 70-80 mil of supplies. That's the representational aspect to PVM, to Inferno, I mean. And then the functional value of the Infernal Cave is the fact that you get +4 strength bonus. But to me, I just don't think that the functional value is that important, because the functional value is only valuable insofar as it's used to bring about more value in other departments, value that could be regarded as representational value. So if you're not using your Infernal Cape for anything, it doesn't really have any functional value as such. If you're not using your 96 fishing to fish more fish or something, then it doesn't really have any functional value as such. So to me, on my view, representational value is the most valuable thing. And you can get more representational value from PVM also. Like if you go for KC, but typically you don't see people caring as much about KC as skillers do about with XP, just because, like I said before, PVMers are more concerned with instrumental value, what it brings about, the GP they can extract from doing a particular method. So that is why people don't generally care as much about KC as skillers do about XP. Then another thing that separates the two things is skilling is holistic, whereas PVM is atomistic. So what this means is, I'll return to this briefly. But holistic means that all skills are tied together. There's no such thing as regarding a skill in isolation. So if you make agility faster, for example, if you really make it easy to get a lot of agility experience, the result of that is you also, not only do you devalue agility in and of itself, but you also devalue all other skills in the game because they all tied together. Because now a skiller can take all the yaos that he saved during agility, and he can put them into some of the other skills that he otherwise wouldn't have been able to. So one devaluation leads to further devaluation, and this is just one more reason to not ever devalue experience. So, and atomistic just means on the PVM side just means that you can regard PVM bosses as isolated. They exist on their own. If something happens to, let's say, Kriara, it doesn't have any implications on, let's say, Vorkath, for example. It might have in some indirect sense with how it affects the market that people will now buy items to kill Vorkath, and that will drive up those prices because they can no longer kill armor because armor is too easy to kill now or whatever. But generally speaking, this is only an indirect impact. They're not tied together in the same way that scaling is, all the skills are tied together. And lastly, which is what I want to turn to now, is that scaling exists on a vertical plane and PVM exists on a horizontal plane. And this also goes for items as well. In a healthy game, items will also be distributed on a horizontal plane. So what it means, if you have a vertical scaling, it means that one item outright beats another item in all instances, whereas on a horizontal plane, items will be situationally best. So there are situations where one weapon is best, and there are situations where another weapon is best. So if we had a healthy game, we would also consider having items that serve their own niche, which we have tried to, but we also failed on various levels. Like the fact that if you give something high magic bonus, if you give a PVM monster high magic bonus, Twisted Bow will be very good. If you give it low magic bonus now, Tumika and Shadow will be very good. So no matter what, you will just have really overpowered items unless you go out of your way to make to give monsters like specific immunity or something. So I think we have some balancing issues with that, but at least we made an effort with balancing to have weapons serve their own niche. But I think we've also failed in many respects when it comes to that. So that's also one reason why we should be very careful with what we do. So now I wanted to talk about the horizontal plane for PVM. It's probably self-explanatory, and I just kind of explained it explained it before when I went over the different ways that these things are different. But basically, PVM monsters exist on a horizontal plane, which means they're not connected with each other. They're not tied together, and the way that skills are tied together. So, for instance, if you have Vorkath, it doesn't have any implications. If they make nerfs or buffs to Vorkath, it will not have any implications as such to Cerberus, for example. It can have that in indirect sense, but it won't have in a direct sense, and that is the reason. Well, at least not a theoretical level, because I understand that adding something like a chemical Hydra, for example, for Iron Man, which gives you lands, might make Vorkath a lot easier, and that's sort of my issue. But like on a theoretical level, a nerf to one boss or a buff to one boss will not have any implications at all to a different boss. They are all isolated entities, and that is why I'm not against PVM updates as such, as long as they're done with respect to proper balancing, which is my issue with it. But on a theoretical level, I am fine with having PVM updates. So for example, if you take something like Cerberus, for example, and a person has 200k KC, in Cerberus, and he cares a lot about Cerberus. Let's suppose the next day a boss comes out that gives you better boots than primordial boots from Cerberus. If this was scaling, what it would mean is that Cerberus would now be devalued. If we suppose that Cerberus was a skill, but because it's PVM and it's an isolated thing, actually the fact that something comes out that makes primordial boots worth less than they were before, it actually, in some sense, revalues Cerberus, the Cerberus case you have, because now people are less inclined to kill Cerberus because they would rather go for the new pair of boots that you can get. So this is actually a good thing for the guy who is trying to preserve the value of his Cerberus KC. Updates for PVM in this respect actually means that you are less likely to be devalued. Unless, of course, the boots or whatever else update that comes into the game would mean that killing Cerberus would now be possible to kill Cerberus to get 10 more kills per hour or something. But usually that shouldn't happen if we have respect for balancing. But this just goes to show how PVM and skilling is different, because skilling updates will lead to devaluation. Even if it's a woodcutting update, it will lead to devaluation of agility because they're all tied together. Whereas the exact opposite is actually true for PVM. When you add a new PVM monster, it doesn't have any implications on already existing monsters. And also another point about the Cerberus thing. Give me one sec. Yeah, another point about Cerberus is the fact that, let's say you've gotten 200k KC and now they add a new boss that brings in better boots than primordial boots, for example. What will happen is that you have profited a lot from going through that 200k KC because primordials were best in slot and they were worth a lot, and now primordials are tanking in price, which means that firstly someone who wanted to do a lot of KC in Cerberus will make less profit from doing Cerberus than he would have if he had started doing Cerberus when you did it. And the second thing is that he will just be less inclined to do Cerberus now. So it's clear that updates for PVM, they actually don't negatively impact the KC you have at a respective boss in the way that devaluations to skilling will negatively affect not only the skill that is devalued, but also all the other skills in the game because they're tied holistically together. So this is why I'm generally very skeptical about skilling updates and not as negative about PVM updates, but I still think that we have approached PVM in a pretty bad way, but it's outside the scope of this video, this ramble, to go over all the problems with the PVM. So one more point that I wanted to bring up with updates from before is something about diminishing return of updates. And again, the reason why we should have updates not regularly but very infrequently, because it's the only thing that works for a game as delicate as this one. So it's about the diminishing return on the development of updates. On the vertical axis you can see the quality of the update, and on the horizontal axis you can see the time to develop. And it is a bit hard to explain what it means that something is what it means, the quality of an update. How do we quantify the quality of an update? How is that even possible? But I think you understand like what it's trying to do, what the point of it is, even if it's hard to like measure how good an update is. It's pretty hard to do. but it's just to illustrate a point that when you spend more time developing something, you will often end up with a better product with what you're trying to do. So I'm going to give the example of two different things here. Well, first, the point I want to make first of all is that when you're trying to develop something, usually people will be satisfied when something has hit the 45 or 60 percent mark of quality. And now you can see that it's only taking 1 to 1.5 months to develop something that gives us 60 percent quality. But in my view, I would rather have that you spend even as much as 8 months in total to hit the 92% mark of equality. And this is the diminishing return part, because jaggers don't want to do that because they don't think it's valuable spending of their time. Because they would rather spend less time and just push out an update that isn't as good as it otherwise could have been if you spend more time on it. But I think that's entirely wrong approach to it. We should rather have much less content and much higher quality than much more content and lower quality. And pretty much all updates in the game that I've seen fails because it hasn't spent adequate time of development to come out with something that is truly great. Like pretty much all updates that you have in the game would have benefited from having more hours sunk into it. And there are very rare exceptions to this. Of course, if it's a tiny update, more development time doesn't really do much. But for pretty much everything else in the game, would have benefited from having more time of development. So if we take two examples, I'll take the example of two updates that are generally regarded as being good updates, and I kind of agree with one of them and I totally disagree with the other one. So one is Inferno and another one is Guardians of the Rift. Guardians of the Rift is also considered a good update despite being absolute dog trash. So it's firstly bad because of the rewards that it gives. The XP rates that you get from doing the minigame itself is on par or outright better than the solo lava rate that you had from before. And you also get the runecrafting outfit from the minigame, and you get the colossal pouch from the minigame as well. So the reward space is just insane, and it's very rewarding in and of itself. That has something to do with the reward space of the minigame. The other thing has to do with the minigame itself, how it's played, and I don't know how people can think this is fun. Like, at the start of the game, you AFK for 3 minutes where you're just mining, and then you're crafting some essence for a little bit, a couple inventories, and that's pretty much all there is to the game. It's not exciting in any way. Like, it's possible for the Rift. You can only die in the Rift like if you fail in the beginning, if you don't build enough good guardians before the leeches come in. So you can only fail in the very beginning of the game, and you would expect it to get progressively harder to play the game. But if you overcome the first period where you have a small possibility of dying if your team is trash, if you overcome that a little bit, then it's smooth sailing from that point on. There's no way you're gonna die. So I just think this is something where the execution is so bad, the reward space is so bad. This is something where putting in more development time would actually put this in a pretty good spot, I would say. Because I think the underlying idea is actually okay. You could basically make this is something like, it's basically, you could make it like Bloons tower defense sort of thing for RuneScape. It would be very, very difficult to execute in a good manner. It'd be very, very difficult to carry out. But that's the whole point. Like, try and see if you can flesh out a good idea for it in like 6 to 10 months, and then maybe it would take 1 to 2 years of development to finally come up with something that would be truly great. Like, it could be like wave based, like Bloons tower defenses, and you would have to react accordingly to what is put in front of you. So if you have some, for example, if you have, let's say, a fire leech coming at you, you would have to make a water guardian, for example. Like it's not important. Like this, I'm just like it's not important with the concrete, how it's carried out in the concrete, but it's just important that you have an update here that is so poorly made, but where the underlying idea is actually okay, but the execution of the update is terrible. So something like this would have benefited a lot from, of course, first of all, being balanced better, but also having more development time sunk into it. Like spend 2 to 3 years and something like this, and you would actually have maybe a good product. So that's my issue with the Guardians of the Rift. And then I want to turn to another update that is extremely popular, which is the Inferno. The Inferno is actually in the exact opposite category. So with Inferno, it's very high quality for what it's trying to do. So if you imagine they spent, like Kieran was behind this update, and I believe he spent like 7 to 10 months developing it, even before it had even passed the poll. So if we assume that he had spent, let's say, an additional 2 or 3 months or 7 to 10 months or something on the update, would the Inferno actually be any better? I don't think so. Like I think he's like exhausted and saturated what this update can do, because it's not clear that if he had spent 5 months more, would we then have more waves? Would the waves be harder? Like it's hard to see what would have happened if more development time had gone into this update. Like it's so well made for what it's trying to do. Unlike pretty much all of the updates in this game, in my opinion. So this is an example where we have actually saturated development time, where the update no longer would benefit from further development time. And of course there can be, I'm sure some people have some small things here and there, some quality of life stuff, whatever, for Inferno that could be improved upon. But just raw development from this side of Kieran wouldn't have benefited this update further. So it goes to show two different updates, and most updates in this game fall in the Guardians of the Rift category, and very few updates fall in the latter category. Yeah, that's pretty much it as far as distinguishing RuneScape from other games and distinguishing skilling from PVM. So the next thing is about account progression. This is one of the main arguments for why we shouldn't have skilling updates. Should someone playing for 3 years from 2017 to 2020, should he have a better or worse account than someone playing 3 years from 2027 to 2030? Because of most people having such a liberal and progressive mindset about this game, for some reason people think that because you are born later and you will start the game later, you're somehow entitled to having a better account for the same amount of effort. Like, this is completely unjustifiable, and no one can explain why this should be the case. So this is my biggest reason for being against skilling updates, because of the exact reason that I just mentioned. The time that you start playing this game shouldn't dictate how good of an account that you have. Like, I can think of very few things as disgusting as the fact that you have people playing the game from like 2013 to like 2018, and then some COVID baby just playing a little bit during lockdowns will actually come out with a better account than a 2013 to 2018 player in the end. It's absolutely disgusting, and that's why we shouldn't have any XP increases, and it can't be justified in any way. It doesn't make any fucking sense. I would like to see someone come up with a convincing argument for why someone playing from 2027 to 2030 should have a better account than someone playing from 2017 to 2020. Like, you can't justify it, and there's no good explanation for it. So in my opinion, account progression should only, and I really mean only, be a function of the amount of effort you put in multiplied by the amount of time that you put in. A variable such as what client you're playing on should not have any say on how much XP you can get, or how further progressed in the game that your account will be. And something like updates also shouldn't be a variable that affects how good your account is. It's complete nonsense. So only account progression should only be a reflection of the time that you spend playing the game and the amount of effort that you put into the game, nothing else. And there's no justification for being against this view. I think if you are against this view, against this strong belief, then you should abandon your wrong belief in the face of the greater belief. You have no reason to believe something as stupid as this. So this brings me to the next point of I'll turn to some objections against the view that I've presented in this video, that I am against any increase in experience. So I'll turn to some objections against this very correct claim and this very correct belief that everyone should hold. So the first one is objection from universality. So what is universality? Basically, it means that what you believe in, you take that to be true under all circumstances and under the veil of ignorance. So I'll give some examples to better illustrate this. If you hold the, of course, very stupid belief that black people are inferior to white people, and as a result of the inferiority, they should be stripped of their rights. If you hold this view, we can only truly believe that you actually hold this view if you commit to the fact that in the hypothetical scenario where you had been a black guy, you would want to have your rights stripped away from you. It's also if you are a socialist or a left liberal, you believe that the proletariat should be freed from the shackles of the bourgeoisie, and you believe in redistribution of wealth. If you hold these beliefs, which is it's fine if you hold them, they're just completely garbage. If you hold these beliefs, then it's important that you also would hold that belief if you had been your capitalist yourself, or you had been a libertarian. And similarly, if you are a libertarian or you are a capitalist, and you believe that redistribution of wealth is immoral, then it's important that you can universalize that belief. And if you had been a poor person, you would still be believing in the fact that redistribution of wealth is inherently morally reprehensible and impermissible. So we can only believe someone if he can universalize his beliefs, because if you can't universalize your beliefs, that means you are inconsistent. And if you have inconsistent beliefs, then we can't really believe that you actually believe what you claim to believe, and then it all falls apart completely. So it's important that I can universalize my belief that I have about the game. So you would have to assume that if I had a very dogshit account, if I was like 1800 total or something, would I still hold the beliefs that I hold now? This is the objection you can come up with, and the answer to that question is yes, I would still hold this belief, because it is the correct belief. So, and why do I know this? Why do I take this to be true? When I was a kid playing this game, which is a little over 20 years ago, I started playing this game. We didn't have a family PC, and the only place that I could realistically play this game was at the library, which was like 4 kilometers walk away from me. I could book 1 hour at the library, and I couldn't do it on back-to-back subsequent days. I could only book like one slot. You could book like from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4, etc. But you only allowed one slot, and it wouldn't let you go on consecutive days. So I was only allowed to, if I went on let's say Tuesday, they wouldn't allow me to book one more hour on Wednesday, for example. So I could only play RuneScape pretty much for 1 hour when I booked an hour at the library when I was a kid. And back then, the game was probably like effectively 50 times harder. And the PC that you were playing on had maybe like 5-10 FPS. It would take 5 minutes of the 60 minutes that I had to play. It would take 5 minutes of those to even load up a client, to load up the game. Well, it was probably not a client, it was probably browser based back then. But this goes to show that back then the game was much harder. And also, since I was only a child back then, my English wasn't very good. Couldn't really read English very well. So the presentation of information and the availability of information wasn't really there. So that's also another obstacle in my path. And despite that fact, despite only being able to play the game for 1 hour a week, pretty much, I still held the view, and I know I wouldn't ever get a good account. I knew that in 4 years from now, from when I started playing, I knew I probably wouldn't be anywhere close to 100 combat, for example, and I wouldn't be close to 1600 total. I already knew that when I played the game, when I started the game. So if it was, and I didn't believe that the game should accommodate to my needs, just because I'm a newbie player who couldn't play a lot, I don't think the game should be shaped after me. So if it wasn't legitimate for me back then to be in favor of increased XP rates, then it's fair to say that it is not legitimate for anyone to claim that we should have increased XP rates today. It's simply not legitimate when you see it in that perspective. And this is also when you add the fact that everyone, doesn't matter who you are, there are probably very, very few exceptions to this, but everyone can play this game from their pocket. Since they have a phone, they can just play the game wherever they are in the world, and they get more FPS from a phone than they do with a PC back in 2002, 2003, right? So there's, if anything, experience should be lower, because the game is simply by default much easier now. It's much more accessible than it ever was. Everyone has good PCs now. Everyone has insane internet now, which also wasn't the case back then when you had dial-up internet. So if anything, the game should be made much harder than it was back then. And it's simply also that this is also another reason why I'm against updates, is that it is much easier to prevent something from going bad than it is to cure it once it's gone bad. So you can't prevent everyone from having a max cape if you care about it, but once everyone has a max cape, you really can't take that away. So it will only get worse over time. This is why it's so important that we are overly careful. We should be over-regulating updates, I would say. It is the only reasonable position to hold, given the light that you should regard this game in. So that is pretty much the objection from universality covered. You can see that I can most definitely universalize my beliefs, since when I was a kid, I never believed that the game should ever be made easier, despite the fact that I could play much less and the game was much harder than it is now. So therefore it follows that it's not legitimate for anyone to hold that belief. Now, someone who can't universalize his beliefs is the average player. If they were in the position of having a really good account with a lot of XP, they would most definitely want to preserve that. And they also would be against XP increases, simply because no one wants to willingly give away hours. So Like if you have 20,000 hours put into the game and it gets devalued to now only be worth 12,000 hours, you will have lost 8,000 hours, and not only will you have lost 8,000 hours in representational value, but it's also 8,000 hours that you could have taken and put into something else. You could have taken those 8,000 hours and put them into PVM, and you would have been much more progressed than you otherwise would have been. So there's no justification for XP increases. It's a stupid belief to hold, and everyone should abandon the belief immediately. So this brings me to the next objection, Matt, because you did it the hard way and now you want other people to suffer. Again, a very stupid belief to hold. What is happening here is actually quite obvious. It's someone who someone who has a low level account who wants to benefit from a proposed mining update, for example, or proposed fishing update, and is now trying to defend this change so that he can save 30, 40, 50 hours on a particular update. So what he's doing is he's actually taking his selfishness and he's trying to project it onto me to make me seem like the selfish player when in fact it is this person who is the selfish player. So he believes that everyone else put, let's say, 150 hours into mining to get 99 mining, and he thinks that he should only have to spend 110 hours in mining. So he thinks that his time is more valuable than everyone else's time. So, and he should be, as a result, he should be given 99 mining faster. This is, of course, a disgusting belief that a lot of people hold because they are selfish, egotistical, narcissistic fucks who shouldn't be playing this game in the first place, and who should most definitely change their beliefs about the game because their beliefs about the game are stupid as fuck. So this is someone accusing me of being selfish when in fact I've just demonstrated through the objection from universality that I'm not selfish in any way. I'm actually selfless. This is someone who is trying to now frame me as the selfish person when in fact it is him who is the selfish person. And this brings me to the next objection, which is you are elitist and you hate noobs, which also isn't true. I'm not elitist, and I also don't hate noobs at all. I actually think we should have a healthy ecosystem with low level accounts and mid level accounts and high level accounts, which is another reason that you should be against this accelerated progression that everyone seems to defend these days. But I don't hate people, and what I hate is not noobs. I don't hate people because they have a bad account. I think it's great that people have bad accounts. What I hate is the attitude that it usually correlates and is associated with having a bad account. It is this entitlement. It is this lazy community, this dog shit community that we've cultivated and fostered over the last 10 years by constantly pandering to the lowest common denominator, pandering to the biggest of the biggest noobs. That is my whole issue, and we're getting a very lazy, we're getting a very docile and low octane and pathetic community as a result of always accommodating, always appealing, always catering to the biggest noobs that we can, always making it easier for them in any way possible. If we had some firm principles in place, I mean some very firm principles where we said the XP rate should be this and we will never change the XP rate ever again. If we had that in place, I think we would actually get a much healthier community. We would get much healthier players as a result of it. Now everyone just wants to see how many easy updates they can push into the game. And that's pretty much what updates have come down to this day. It's pretty much just how can we make the game as easy as possible. It's not about anything else. It's very pathetic to see the way that it's changed. Then we have another one, which is the objection from the game is boring, that's why we need updates. So firstly, Uh, I actually believe that having more updates contributes to a feeling of boredom, especially when the updates revolve around making the game easier. Because what happens when you make max cape very easy? Um, People obtain it much easier, and when they obtain their cape, they think, this wasn't the end all be all that I expected it to be. This wasn't all that I had hoped for it would be, and that's because you made it so extremely easy that people don't appreciate it intrinsically as much as they otherwise would have in the past. So, ironically, here it's the fact that updates actually, in and of themselves, contribute to the fact that people are feeling bored with the game, especially when it comes to like skilling updates and getting a max cape and all that. But it also applies to other updates, like PVM updates. So updates actually make the game feel more boring in some ways. And another way that uh, I would reject such an objection is um, the game is boring and that's why we need updates. Like, it's absurd that you're playing a sandbox game where basically you're choosing your own path. You're choosing how you want to play the game, how you want to progress the game, and still you find the game to be boring. That's probably through fault of your own more than it has to do with updates, because all of the players can seem to find ways to extract enjoyment and fun out of this game. So it's your own problem, or maybe the game just isn't for you. And we shouldn't make this for you by making updates that go strictly against the RuneScape spirit and what this game should strive to be. This brings me to my last point before I'm wrapping up this video. The video where I've talked for way too long in. I'm kind of just flying off a tangent at this point. But the last point is, so like as you can hear from this video, I've been very skeptical up until this point. It's just been a very negative, skeptical prognosis of the game. But I also think there's a solution that I wouldn't, in a perfect world, would want us to have to enact. But I think at this point it is absolutely necessary that we follow through with this. So, what is this view? It's a view that I shared 4 months ago. Not 4 months ago, 4 years ago. Sort of like tongue in cheek. I'll bring it up here if I can find it. So here's a tweet. I'll just read it out loud in case you are listening to this. Hello Ash, can we allow people to customize their accounts in terms of experience on Tutorial Island? People would be able to choose between 0 to 13 million experience in every skill. This would make it so you wouldn't have to make updates that further ruin the game. We would still have 187 million sacred experience to dig into for every skill, so letting everyone start off as maximum seems like a very, very small price to pay, far better than venoming the entire 200 million. This would make normies, redditors, casuals, and high-level players alike happy, so I don't see why not. And this is sort of like tongue-in-cheek, of course. It's obvious to everyone why it's bad that you start off with a max K from Tutorial Island right off the get-go. But I think we're at a point now where we have to realize that we are not going to be able to reconcile the average player, the average normie, with the high-level players. The gap between the two groups is simply too great. It is way too insane. So for all parties, this would make everyone happy. For all parties, it is necessary now that we instill a skilling council made up of high-level players, high-level skillers, who will decide the experience of methods after you have reached 99 in the skill. So all the normies, all the noobs, all the casuals, all the redditors, they can do whatever the fuck they want with the skills until 99, and we get to choose what happens from 13 million to 200 million. It is absolutely necessary that we have this in place, and we have it in place as soon as possible. There's little less disgusting as the fact that little Timmy will be voting in a stupid mining update that is extremely broken so that he can save 30 hours on mining to 99, when this means that people much higher than him should will as a result lose upwards of thousands of hours just because we want little Timmy to save 30 hours in his skills. It is absolutely disgusting, and this is why we need desperately to prevent the profane pre-99 skilling to contaminate the sacred post-99 skilling. It is desperately needed for us to, for the high level skills to get to decide what happens after 99. And this is something that would make everyone happy, I think, because all the pre-99 newbies who are voting in all these stupid updates, they're only doing it so they can advance to 99 faster. And they do so at the expense of making destroying a whole skill, or destroying all skills, because as I explained earlier, all skills are holistically tied together. So it is necessary that we install a skilling council as soon as possible, where the skilling council will decide what will happen to post 99 skilling, and then we can live happily ever after in communal, in a cohabit situation, high level players and noobs alike, where we are both happy with what is happening to the game. But this current, it's not gonna work. Like normally in a perfect world, I wouldn't want the average person to decide how long maxing should take or how easy it should be, but it's absolutely necessary that we try and separate the two things now. We need to separate pre and post 99, and we should let newbies decide pre 99, and we should let high level players decide post 99. It is absolutely necessary that we have this policy in place as soon as possible. We really need it now, and rather tomorrow than in 2 years. So yeah, that pretty much does it for this one. I initially, when I started this video, I said I wanted to bring down the amount of time that I talked for, and I've just been completely lost in the sauce, and I've talked for way too long now, so I am going to wrap it up here, and I'll see you in the next one.